As the day quietly fades and stars begin to whisper above, welcome to Korean History Whispers. Tonight, we gently explore the heart and mind of Kim Yusin. While his deeds carve the destiny of a nation, tonight you will walk beside the warrior whose blood carried the dreams of fallen kingdoms. Close your eyes and let his whispered memories carry you to peaceful sleep. In the year 595, as the Korean peninsula trembled beneath the weight of endless warfare, heaven itself seemed to announce the arrival of someone destined to reshape the very foundations of East Asian history. The child born that year would carry within his veins the blood of fallen royalty, the memories of conquered peoples, and the fierce determination to forge from chaos something magnificent and enduring. His birthplace was Mano County, in what is now the mountainous region of Jincheon, far from the centers of power where kings plotted and armies gathered. Yet this remote location seemed fitting for someone whose life would bridge the gap between the old world of fractured kingdoms and the new era of unified strength that his actions would create. Kim Yusin entered the world as the descendant of extraordinary lineage. His great-great-grandfather had been King Gaya, the last ruler of Gaya, one of the small but proud kingdoms that had fallen to Silla's expanding power in 532. The blood that flowed through young Yusin's veins carried the genetic memory of sovereignty, the inherited understanding of what it meant to rule and be ruled, to conquer and be conquered. But his heritage was far more complex than simple defeated royalty. His father, Kim Seo-hyun, had married into the very heart of Silla's ruling elite, taking as his wife Lady Man-myung, whose own blood connected her to King Jin-han through the royal Silla lineage. This marriage represented more than personal affection. It was a political masterstroke that transformed potential enemies into essential allies. The infant Yusin embodied in his very existence the possibility of reconciliation between old wounds and new possibilities. He was simultaneously the heir to Gaya's proud independence and Silla's imperial ambitions, a living symbol of how former enemies could become the foundation for unprecedented strength. From his earliest years, the signs of his exceptional destiny manifested in ways that amazed and sometimes frightened those around him. The historical chronicles speak of miraculous omens surrounding his birth, celestial phenomena that seemed to herald the arrival of someone marked by heaven for extraordinary achievement. Whether these accounts represent literal truth or mythic elaboration matters less than what they reveal about how his contemporaries understood his significance. As he grew from infant to child, his natural abilities became apparent to everyone in his family circle. This was not merely a bright youngster, but someone whose physical coordination, mental acuity, and spiritual intensity suggested capabilities that transcended normal human limitations. His parents recognized that they were raising not just a son but a force of nature that would require the most sophisticated guidance available. At the age of 15, in the year 609, Yusin took the crucial step that would define the trajectory of his adult life. He entered the ranks of the Hwarang, the elite warrior, scholars who represented the highest ideals of Silla's civilization. This was no mere military appointment, but admission to an exclusive brotherhood that combined martial prowess with philosophical cultivation, physical training with spiritual development. The Hwarang system was one of Silla's most innovative institutions, creating a warrior class that was educated in literature, ethics, and statecraft, as well as swordsmanship and military tactics. Members were expected to embody the highest virtues of loyalty, courage, wisdom, and moral integrity. For someone of Yusin's background and abilities, membership in this elite group provided the perfect environment for developing his extraordinary potential. His training in the mountains became legendary for its intensity and transformative power. Far from the distractions and comforts of civilized life, he subjected himself to physical and mental disciplines that would have broken lesser men. He studied not just the techniques of warfare but the philosophical foundations that gave meaning to military service. He learned to see combat not as mere violence, but as a form of moral action in service of higher principles. The story that would become most famous from this period of his life reveals the depth of his commitment to ethical development. While still a young man, he had formed an attachment to a courtesan named Cheng-wan, whose beauty and charm had captivated him completely. This relationship, while not unusual for young warriors of his era, troubled his mother, who understood that such entanglements could compromise the focused dedication required for true greatness. Her criticism of this relationship forced Yusin to confront a fundamental choice between personal pleasure and higher duty. The struggle was not merely external but represented an internal battle between competing aspects of his nature. The resolution of this conflict would define not just his personal character, but his capacity to serve causes greater than individual desire. The moment of decision came in a way that would become one of the most celebrated moral tales in Korean history. Having resolved never to see Cheng-wan again, Yusin fell asleep only to wake and discover that his horse had carried him, apparently without conscious direction, directly to her residence. Faced with this seeming betrayal by his own subconscious impulses, he made a choice that revealed the steel core of his moral determination. Without hesitation, he drew his sword and beheaded the animal that had led him astray. The act was shocking in its decisive brutality, but it represented far more than anger or punishment. It was a symbolic execution of his own weakness, a physical demonstration that he would allow nothing, not even his deepest instincts, to deflect him from the path of honor and duty. This incident became legendary not because of its violence, but because of what it revealed about the kind of man Yusin was becoming. Here was someone capable of absolute self-discipline, willing to sacrifice anything that might compromise his effectiveness as a servant of his kingdom and his principles. The young warrior who could kill his own horse to preserve his moral integrity was clearly destined for achievements that ordinary men could never approach. His reputation for uncompromising dedication spread throughout the warring community and beyond, marking him as someone to watch, someone whose future contributions might prove exceptional. The training that followed built upon this foundation of iron self-control, developing the tactical brilliance and strategic vision that would eventually reshape the political map of East Asia. The mountain retreats where he completed his warrior education were more than training grounds. They were laboratories for forging human beings capable of superhuman achievement. Here, surrounded by the natural beauty and harsh challenges of Korea's rugged landscape, Yusin learned to integrate all aspects of his being into a unified instrument of will and capability. He studied the classical military texts that revealed the strategic principles governing successful warfare. He mastered weapons and tactics that would enable him to dominate any battlefield. He developed the physical conditioning that would allow him to endure campaigns that would exhaust younger men. Most importantly, he cultivated the mental clarity and emotional stability that would enable him to make life and death decisions under the most extreme pressure. But perhaps the most crucial aspect of his education was learning to see beyond immediate tactical considerations to understand the larger patterns that shape the rise and fall of kingdoms. He developed the capacity to think in terms of decades rather than months, to perceive how today's decisions would influence tomorrow's possibilities, to balance competing considerations in ways that maximized long-term advantage. The young man who emerged from this intensive preparation was fundamentally different from the teenager who had entered the warring ranks. He had been transformed from someone with exceptional potential into someone with proven capability, from a promising student into a formidable master of his chosen profession. At the age of 34, in the year 629, Kim Yusin would face his first major test as a military commander. The opportunity came during Silla's campaign against Goguryeo Nangbi Castle, a strategic fortress that commanded important approaches to Silla territory. The battle would serve as his introduction to history, the moment when his years of preparation would be validated through actual achievement. But that momentous encounter lay ahead.
For now, the young warrior stood poised on the threshold of greatness. His character forged in the crucible of rigorous self-discipline, his abilities honed through years of intensive training. His spirit fired by the vision of service to causes greater than individual ambition. The blood of fallen Gaya kings flowed through his veins, carrying with it the memory of proud independence, and the determination never again to submit to foreign domination. The training of Silla's elite warrior class had given him the skills necessary to transform that inherited legacy into effective action. The moral discipline he had developed through years of spiritual cultivation ensured that his formidable capabilities would be directed toward worthy ends. The stage was set for one of the most remarkable military careers in Korean history, a sequence of campaigns and battles that would ultimately unite the Korean peninsula under a single authority for the first time. The young man who had proven his moral courage by beheading his own horse would soon prove his tactical genius by defeating enemies who had seemed invincible. The blood of fallen kings was about to become the foundation for a kingdom that would endure for nearly 1,000 years. The boy born amid miraculous omens was about to fulfill the destiny that heaven had apparently marked out for him from the moment of his birth. As evening mysteries as from ancient battlefields, we return to the saga of Kim Yusin. Tonight, we witness the moment when destiny brings together two extraordinary men, whose partnership would reshape the fate of Korea forever. While swords clash and kingdoms tremble, you will feel the birth of an alliance that would echo through the ages. The year 629 marked the true beginning of Kim Yusin's legendary career, though few could have predicted the magnitude of what was about to unfold. At 34, he had completed his transformation from promising youth to accomplished warrior. But he remained largely unknown beyond the circles of military specialists, who recognized exceptional talent when they encountered it. The opportunity that would change everything came with Silla's decision to launch a major offensive against Goguryeo strategic fortress of Nangbi Castle. This was no routine border skirmish but a carefully planned operation designed to shift the balance of power in the ongoing struggle that had consumed the Korean peninsula for generations. The fortress commanded crucial approaches to Silla territory, and its capture would demonstrate that the southern kingdom possessed the military capability to challenge its larger neighbors. Kim Yusin's father, Kim Taejong, had been selected to lead this critical campaign, a testament to both his military reputation and his political standing within Silla's elite hierarchy. The decision to include his son as a middle-rank commander reflected confidence in the younger man's potential, but also represented a calculated risk success would enhance both their reputations. Failure could destroy the family's political prospects permanently. The army that marched toward Nangbi Castle represented Silla's finest military forces. Carefully selected troops whose training and equipment reflected decades of preparation for exactly this kind of major engagement. Yet everyone understood that they faced a formidable challenge. Goguryeo was a battle-hardened kingdom with vast resources and extensive experience in siege warfare. Their fortresses were legendary for their strength, their garrisons renowned for their determination. As the Silla forces approached their objective, tension mounted throughout the ranks. This was not merely another campaign, but a test of whether their kingdom possessed the strength and skill necessary to compete with the great powers that dominated Northeast Asia. The soldiers understood that their performance in the coming battle would influence strategic calculations for years to come. The initial phases of the siege proceeded according to plan, with Silla forces establishing positions around the fortress and beginning the methodical process of reducing its defenses. But as so often happens in military operations, the situation deteriorated rapidly when the defenders proved more resourceful and determined than anticipated. What had been conceived as a straightforward assault became a desperate struggle for survival. The turning point came when Goguryeo reinforcements arrived unexpectedly, catching the Silla forces in a vulnerable position where their siege lines became exposed to attack from multiple directions.
The tactical situation shifted from advantageous to desperate within a matter of hours, threatening to transform what should have been a victory into a catastrophic defeat that would undermine Silla's military credibility for generations. It was at this moment of supreme crisis that Kim Yusin seized the opportunity that would define his entire career. Recognizing that conventional tactics would not suffice to salvage the deteriorating situation, he made the kind of bold decision that separates truly great commanders from merely competent ones. Without waiting for orders or consulting with his superiors, he gathered a small force of elite troops and launched a direct assault on the enemy's strongest position. The attack was stunning in its audacity and effectiveness. Leading from the front with the kind of personal courage that inspired his followers to superhuman efforts, Yusin penetrated deep into enemy lines and engaged their commander in single combat. The duel that followed became legendary, not just for its dramatic intensity, but for its symbolic significance as representing the clash between old and new approaches to warfare. When Yusin's sword found its mark and the enemy commander fell, the psychological impact rippled through both armies like an earthquake. The Goguryeo forces, demoralized by the loss of their leader and stunned by the unexpected reversal of fortune, began to waver in their resistance. The Silla troops, inspired by their young hero's spectacular achievement, pressed their advantage with renewed determination. The victory that followed was complete and decisive, transforming what had threatened to become a humiliating defeat into one of Silla's most celebrated military triumphs. More importantly for the future of Korean history, the battle introduced Kim Yusin to another participant, whose own destiny would prove equally significant: Kim Yong-kun, father of the future King Taejong Muyeol. Kim Yong-chun had fought with distinction in the campaign, displaying the kind of military acumen and political sophistication that marked him as one of Silla's most promising leaders. His son, Kim Chunchu, though not yet old enough for military service, was already showing signs of the intellectual brilliance and strategic vision that would eventually make him one of Korea's greatest rulers. The relationship that began to develop between the Kim Yusin and Kim Chunchu families during the aftermath of the Nangbi Castle victory would prove to be one of the most consequential political partnerships in Korea. What started as mutual respect between accomplished warriors gradually evolved into a comprehensive alliance that would reshape the political landscape of East Asia. The foundation for this alliance was strengthened immeasurably when Kim Yusin's sister, Moon Hui, married Kim Chunchu during the reign of Queen Seondeok. This was far more than a conventional political marriage. It represented the formal unification of two of Silla's most capable and ambitious families. The personal bonds created by this union would provide the emotional foundation for a political partnership that would endure through decades of challenge and triumph. The marriage also reflected the sophisticated understanding of power dynamics that characterized both families. By joining their bloodlines, they created a kinship network that would enable them to coordinate their political activities while maintaining the flexibility necessary to adapt to changing circumstances. The children born from this union would inherit not just material wealth, but the accumulated wisdom and connections of two extraordinary lineages. As the 630s progressed, the partnership between Kim Yusin and Kim Chunchu deepened and expanded beyond their immediate families, to encompass broader networks of allies and supporters. They developed complementary areas of expertise that allowed them to address different aspects of Silla's strategic challenges. Chunchu focused primarily on diplomacy and political maneuvering, while Yusin concentrated on military affairs and tactical innovation. His division of labor proved extraordinarily effective because it allowed each man to develop his natural strengths while compensating for areas where his partner possessed superior capabilities. Chunchu's intellectual brilliance and political sophistication provided the strategic vision necessary for long-term planning, while Yusin's military genius and inspirational leadership ensured that those plans could be implemented effectively on the battlefield. The first major test of their partnership came in 642, when Baekje launched a devastating offensive that threatened to destroy Silla's position in the western regions of the peninsula. The attack, led by King Yusin, captured Gaya Castle, and more than 40 other fortifications along the Nakdong River. Representing the most serious threat Silla had faced in generations, the crisis deepened when Kim Chunchu's daughter and son-in-law were killed during the fall of Gaya Castle, transforming what had been a strategic setback into a personal tragedy that demanded vengeance. The loss galvanized Chunchu's determination to find a solution to Silla's deteriorating military situation, leading him to undertake one of the most dangerous diplomatic missions in Korean history. His decision to travel to Goguryeo seeking military assistance represented a calculated gamble that could have destroyed both his personal reputation and Silla's political credibility. The mission required him to approach Yeon Gesamon, the powerful strongman who had recently seized control of Goguryeo through a bloody coup. This was a man known for his ruthlessness and unpredictability, someone perfectly capable of killing an enemy diplomat to send a message about Goguryeo's intentions. When news reached Silla that Chunchu had been detained by Yeon Gesamon, potentially as a hostage or prisoner, Kim Yusin faced a moment of truth that would define the nature of their alliance. He could have chosen to distance himself from his partner's apparent failure, protecting his own position while abandoning Chunchu to whatever fate awaited him in the Goguryeo capital. Instead, Yusin demonstrated the depth of his loyalty and the sophistication of his strategic thinking by immediately organizing a rescue mission that was breathtaking in its scope and audacity. He assembled 3,000 of Silla's finest warriors, elite troops whose very mobilization sent a clear message that Silla was prepared to wage war against Goguryeo if necessary to secure Chunchu's release. The psychological impact of this demonstration was exactly what Yusin had calculated. Yeon Gesamon, it faced with the prospect of immediate military confrontation, at a time when his own position remained insecure, chose pragmatism over aggression, rather than risk a war that might destabilize his regime. He released Chunchu and allowed him to return to Silla with his diplomatic mission technically unsuccessful, but his personal safety intact. The rescue operation revealed several crucial aspects of the partnership that would shape future events. It demonstrated Yusin's willingness to risk everything for personal loyalty, a quality that would inspire absolute devotion among his followers. It showed his understanding of psychological warfare and his ability to achieve strategic objectives through the mere threat of military action. Most importantly, it confirmed that the alliance between the two men transcended mere political convenience to encompass genuine personal commitment. The crisis also revealed Chunchu's own remarkable qualities as a leader and strategist. His willingness to undertake such a dangerous mission for Silla's benefit demonstrated the kind of personal courage that complemented his intellectual abilities. His successful navigation of the complex political currents in Yeon Gesamon's court showed diplomatic skills that would prove invaluable in future negotiations by the mid-640s. The partnership between Kim Yusin and Kim Chunchu had evolved into the dominant force in Silla politics, with both men wielding influence that extended far beyond their official positions. Their complementary skills and mutual trust created a decision-making partnership that was more effective than traditional monarchical authority because it combined different types of expertise while maintaining unified direction. Their influence was further strengthened by their expanding network of family connections and political alliance. The marriage between Moon Hui and Chunchu had produced children who would themselves become important political figures. Additional marriages between their extended families created an intricate web of relationships that provided multiple channels for coordination and influence. As Queen Seondeok's reign entered its final phase, both men understood that major changes were approaching that would test their partnership in new ways. The Queen's lack of direct heirs meant that the succession would likely be contested, creating opportunities for ambitious families while threatening the stability that Silla needed to address its external challenges. The death of Queen Seondeok in 647 brought exactly the kind of crisis they had anticipated. The powerful court official Beatum attempted to seize power, claiming that female rule was inappropriate, and that he represented the legitimate interests of Silla's traditional elite. His rebellion represented not just a challenge to royal authority but a direct threat to the political coalition that Kim Yusin and Kim Chunchu had spent years constructing. Their response was swift, decisive, and perfectly coordinated. While Chunchu mobilized political support for Queen Jindeok, Seondeok's designated successor, Yusin organized the military response that would crush Baekje's rebellion before it could gain momentum. The successful suppression of this internal threat demonstrated their ability to act as an effective governing partnership, even during periods of extreme crisis. With Queen Jindeok safely installed on the throne and Baekje's rebellion crushed, the foundation was laid for the next phase of their collaboration. Chunchu's diplomatic missions to Tang China had already begun to bear fruit, creating the possibility of a military alliance that could fundamentally alter the balance of power on the Korean peninsula. The stage was now set for the great campaigns that would define both their legacies and the future of Korea itself. The alliance forged in the aftermath of the Nangbi Castle victory had matured into a partnership capable of achieving what had seemed impossible just decades earlier: the unification of the Korean peninsula under a single authority. The blood of fallen kings had found its destiny in service to a cause greater than personal ambition. The forging of an alliance had created an instrument powerful enough to reshape the political geography of East Asia. As storm clouds gather over ancient kingdoms, we return to witness Kim Yusin at the height of his power. Tonight, we stand beside the Supreme Commander, whose strategic genius would unite a divided peninsula forever. While armies clash and empires tremble, you will feel the thunder of history being written in blood and steel. The year 654 marked a pivotal transformation in the relationship between Kim Yusin and Kim Chunchu that would reshape the destiny of Korea. When Queen Jindeok passed away, the throne passed not to another member of the traditional royal lineage, but to Kim Chunchu himself, who took the title King Taejong Muyeol. For the first time in their partnership, one of them wielded absolute royal authority, while the other served as his supreme military commander. His transition could have destroyed their alliance, as the dynamics between monarch and subject differed fundamentally from those between political partners. The potential for jealousy, suspicion, and competing ambitions was enormous, particularly given that both men possessed the kind of strong personalities that typically resist subordination to any other authority. Instead, their relationship deepened and became even more effective than before. Chunchu's elevation to the throne provided the political legitimacy and resource allocation authority necessary for ambitious military campaigns, while Yusin's unquestioned loyalty and tactical brilliance ensured that royal directives would be implemented with maximum effectiveness. The partnership that had begun on the battlefield at Nangbi Castle had evolved into an instrument of unprecedented power and precision. The new king's first major decision was to formalize and strengthen their personal bond through an additional marriage alliance. In 655, he gave his third daughter to Kim Yusin as a wife, creating overlapping kinship connections that made their families virtually indistinguishable from a political standpoint. This union represented more than personal affection. It was a public declaration that the Kim Yusin and royal lines were now permanently intertwined. The marriage also served crucial practical purposes by ensuring that future generations would inherit both royal blood and the military genius that had made Kim Yusin legendary. The children born from this union would pose as legitimacy claims that could stabilize the kingdom during future succession crises while maintaining the strategic capabilities that made Silla's military supremacy possible. By 660, the king felt confident enough in their partnership to elevate Kim Yusin to the highest possible position within Silla's governmental hierarchy. His appointment as Sangdedeong, the supreme minister who ranked above all other officials except the monarch himself,
represented formal recognition that he had become the kingdom's second most powerful individual. This promotion reflected not just royal favor, but acknowledgement that unifying the Korean peninsula would require Kim Yusin's complete authority over all military resources. The great test of their mature partnership came with the decision to launch the final campaigns that would eliminate Baekje and Goguryeo as independent kingdoms. These were not border adjustments or territorial expansions, but wars of conquest designed to fundamentally restructure the political geography of East Asia. Success would create the first unified Korean state in history. Failure would likely result in Silla's own destruction by enemies who could no longer afford to allow such an ambitious neighbor to survive. The Baekje campaign of 660 represented the culmination of decades of strategic planning and diplomatic preparation. Kim Chunchu's earlier missions to Tang China had secured a military alliance that provided Silla with the additional resources necessary for such an ambitious undertaking. The combined Silla-Tang force that advanced against Baekje represented the largest army ever assembled for operations on the Korean peninsula. Kim Yusin's role as supreme commander of Silla's 50,000 troops placed him at the center of one of East Asia's most significant military operations. His responsibilities extended far beyond tactical battlefield decisions to encompass the coordination of logistics, intelligence, and diplomatic considerations that would determine the campaign's ultimate success or failure. The march toward Baekje's capital revealed the extent to which Kim Yusin had revolutionized Silla's military capabilities during his decades of service. The army under his command was not merely larger than previous Silla forces, but qualitatively different in its training, equipment, and organizational sophistication. These were professional soldiers whose capabilities reflected the systematic development of military science that he had overseen throughout his career. But the campaign's most critical moment came not during the siege of the capital, but at the seemingly minor engagement at Hwangsan Plain, where Baekje's general Gaya made a desperate attempt to prevent the fall of his kingdom. With only 5,000 troops, Gaya positioned his forces to block the crucial route that Silla forces needed to reach their rendezvous with the Tang army. The battle that followed became legendary for its intensity and tragic heroism. Gyabeke's soldiers, knowing they faced overwhelming odds, fought with the desperate courage of men who understood they were making their final stand for their kingdom's independence. Their resistance was so fierce that Kim Yusin's forces, despite their numerical superiority, suffered heavy casualties and arrived at the designated meeting point later than promised. The delay created a diplomatic crisis that threatened to undermine the entire alliance with Tang China. The Tang commander, Su Dingfang, was a veteran general whose own reputation depended on maintaining strict discipline and accountability within allied forces. When the Silla contingent arrived behind schedule, he interpreted this as evidence of unreliability that could not be tolerated in future operations. Su Dingfang's decision to execute Kim Muyeol, the Silla liaison officer responsible for coordination between the allied armies, represented more than military discipline. It was a clear assertion of Tang's superiority within the alliance, and a warning that Chinese commanders would not accept Korean behavior that contradicted their orders or expectations. Kim Yusin's response to this provocation revealed the steel core of independence that had always motivated his service to Silla. Rather than accepting the execution as a regrettable but necessary aspect of alliance warfare, he confronted Su Dingfang directly, making clear that Silla forces were partners rather than subordinates in the anti-Baekje coalition. The confrontation between the two commanders could have destroyed the alliance and transformed the campaign against Baekje into a three-way conflict that would have benefited no one except Goguryeo. Instead, Kim Yusin's demonstration of Silla's determination to maintain its dignity and independence actually strengthened the partnership by establishing clear boundaries that both sides could respect. His willingness to risk conflict with Tang China over a matter of principle sent crucial messages to multiple audiences. Silla's own forces understood that their commander would never sacrifice Korean interests for the sake of diplomatic convenience. Tang officials recognized that they were dealing with an ally whose cooperation was valuable precisely because it was freely given rather than coerced. Most importantly, potential future enemies learned that Silla under Kim Yusin's military leadership possessed both the capability and determination to defend its positions against any challenger. The successful conclusion of the Baekje campaign validated the strategic vision that Kim Chunchu and Kim Yusin had developed over decades of partnership. Their combination of diplomatic preparation and military execution had achieved what seemed impossible: the destruction of one of Korea's three traditional kingdoms, through a carefully coordinated operation that maximized Silla's advantages, while minimizing its vulnerabilities. But even as they celebrated this triumph, both men understood that the elimination of Baekje represented only the first phase of a larger project. Goguryeo remained the most formidable military power in Northeast Asia, with resources and strategic depth that made it far more dangerous than Baekje had ever been. The campaigns that lay ahead would test their partnership in ways that previous operations had only hinted at. The death of King Taejong Muyeol in 661 DIM, shortly after the Baekje victory, created exactly the kind of succession crisis that both men had always feared. The transition to his son, King Min-mu, required careful management to ensure that the momentum gained through recent victories would not be lost during a period of potential internal instability. Kim Yusin's role during this transition revealed the maturity and political sophistication he had developed through decades of high-level responsibility. Rather than attempting to exploit the succession for personal advantage, he focused entirely on ensuring that the new king would be able to continue the unification project without interruption. His loyalty to the royal institution transcended personal relationships, demonstrating the kind of principled service that made him invaluable to multiple generations of rulers. King Min-mu's decision to retain Kim Yusin in his position as supreme military commander reflected both practical necessity and recognition of irreplaceable expertise. The campaigns against Goguryeo would require the kind of strategic vision and tactical brilliance that Kim Yusin had spent his entire career developing. No other individual in Silla possessed the combination of experience, reputation, and capabilities necessary for such an ambitious undertaking. The Goguryeo campaigns that began in the mid-660s represented a fundamentally different strategic challenge from the Baekje operation. Where Baekje had been geographically compact and relatively isolated, Goguryeo possessed vast territories, multiple fortress systems, and extensive experience in resisting foreign invasion. The Tang alliance remained crucial, but the primary responsibility for success would fall on Kim Yusin's ability to outmaneuver and outfight opponents who had dominated Northeast Asian warfare for centuries. His approach to this challenge revealed the evolution of his strategic thinking from the direct assault tactics that had characterized his early career to the sophisticated combine. Rather than seeking immediate decisive battles, he focused on systematic reduction of enemy capabilities through carefully coordinated operations that maximized Silla's advantages. The campaign of 661, when Tang forces under Su Dingfang became trapped during their siege of Pyongyang, provided Kim Yusin with an opportunity to demonstrate both his tactical brilliance and his understanding of alliance politics. The Tang army, caught between a fortified city and the onset of winter, faced potential annihilation unless they could secure supplies and safe passage for withdrawal. Kim Yusin's relief operation was a masterpiece of military logistics and psychological manipulation. He not only delivered essential supplies to the trapped Tang forces, but did so in a manner that inflicted significant casualties on Goguryeo troops, while demonstrating Silla's indispensability as an ally. The operation ensured Tang's survival while establishing Kim Yusin's reputation as someone whose strategic capabilities transcended narrow Korean interests. As the 660s progressed, Kim Yusin's role gradually evolved from active field commander to senior strategist whose experience and wisdom guided overall campaign planning. His advancing age, 70 by 664, meant that he could no longer personally lead the kind of aggressive operations that had characterized his earlier career. Instead, he focused on developing the next generation of Silla commanders, while providing the strategic vision that would enable them to complete the Unification project. His request for retirement in 664, refused by King Menmu, reflected not weakness or loss of commitment, but recognition that the nature of his service needed to adapt to changing circumstances. The king's insistence that he remain in position demonstrated the continued importance of his symbolic value, as well as his practical contributions to ongoing military operations. The tiger's roar had echoed across the peninsula, announcing the arrival of a unified Korea. But the greatest challenges still lay ahead, requiring all the wisdom and determination that a lifetime of service had created. As twilight descends upon a unified peninsula, we witness the final chapter of Kim Yusin's earthly journey. Tonight, we stand beside the ancient warrior, as he transforms from mortal hero into eternal guardian. While his physical form fades, you will feel the immortal spirit that continues to watch over Korea through the ages. The year 668 marked the culmination of everything Kim Yusin and his royal partners had worked toward for nearly 4 decades. The final campaign against Goguryeo was about to begin, representing the last obstacle to achieving what had once seemed impossible: the complete unification of the Korean peninsula under a single authority for the first time in history. Kim Yusin's appointment as Supreme Field Marshal for this decisive operation represented both the ultimate recognition of his military genius and a poignant acknowledgement of the passage of time. At 73, he was being entrusted with the most important command of his career, at an age when most warriors had long since retired to peaceful obscurity. The irony was not lost on anyone, least of all Kim Yusin himself. The decision about whether he should personally accompany the expedition created intense debate within Silla's military hierarchy. Many of his subordinate commanders argued passionately that his presence on the battlefield would inspire the troops to superhuman efforts, as it had so many times throughout his legendary career. They understood that Kim Yusin's reputation alone was worth thousands of soldiers in terms of psychological impact on both allies and enemies. But King Menmu, demonstrating the wisdom that made him worthy of his father's legacy, recognized that the risks of losing such an irreplaceable figure outweighed any potential benefits his physical presence might provide. The kingdom's future stability depended on preserving Kim Yusin's accumulated wisdom and experience for the challenges that would follow military victory. His value as elder statesman and strategic advisor had become too important to risk in active combat. The compromise solution reflected the sophisticated understanding of leadership that both men had developed through decades of collaboration. Kim Yusin would retain supreme authority over all military operations, while directing the campaign from Silla's capital, rather than from field headquarters. This arrangement allowed him to coordinate the complex logistics and political considerations that would determine ultimate success, while ensuring his survival to oversee the even more challenging task of governing a unified peninsula. The Goguryeo campaign that unfolded under his distant supervision demonstrated the extent to which Kim Yusin. The forces that advanced against the Northern Kingdom were not merely larger than previous Silla armies, but represented a qualitatively different kind of military organization. One that integrated advanced siege techniques, sophisticated intelligence operations, and coordinated naval support in ways that reflected decades of systematic development. The success of these operations validated the strategic vision that Kim Yusin had been developing since his early days as a warring warrior. His understanding that military victory required more than battlefield prowess had led him to create institutional frameworks that could function effectively even without his direct personal involvement. The army that conquered Goguryeo was his masterpiece, a living embodiment of everything he had learned about war, politics, and human nature. When news arrived that Goguryeo capital had fallen, and the last of the three kingdoms had been eliminated as an independent entity, Kim Yusin experienced what must have been one of the most profound moments of satisfaction in human history. The dream that had motivated his entire adult life. The vision that had sustained him through decades of warfare and political struggle had finally been achieved. Korea was unified. And he had played the decisive role in making that unification possible. King Menmu's decision to create the unprecedented rank of Taedong specifically for Kim Yusin reflected both royal gratitude and recognition that traditional governmental hierarchies were inadequate to acknowledge contributions of such historical magnitude. This was more than an honorary title. It was an acknowledgement that Kim Yusin had transcended normal categories of service to become something approaching a co-founder of the unified Korean state. The special privileges that accompanied this elevation revealed the depth of royal appreciation for his sacrifices and achievements. The permission to enter the royal presence without bowing or running demonstrated that Kim Yusin was now viewed as something approaching an equal, rather than a subject. These were unprecedented honors that reflected his transformation from servant of the state into living symbol of Korean independence and capability. But perhaps the most significant aspect of his final years was the role he played in establishing the institutional foundations that would enable unified Korea to survive and prosper long after. His influence on military organization, administrative procedures, and strategic doctrine would shape Korean governance for centuries, ensuring that the unification he had achieved would prove lasting rather than temporary. The challenge of governing a unified peninsula proved even more complex than the military campaigns that had created it. The integration of formerly independent territories, each with their own traditions and power structures, required political skills that complemented but differed from military expertise. Kim Yusin's contribution to this process reflected the breadth of his capabilities and the depth of his understanding of statecraft. His approach to these challenges revealed the philosophical sophistication that had always distinguished him from merely competent military commanders. He understood that lasting unification required more than conquest. It demanded the creation of shared institutions and common identities that could transcend the regional loyalties that had previously divided the peninsula. His recommendations for administrative reform reflected decades of thinking about how to transform military victory into political stability. The wisdom he provided during these crucial years was particularly valuable because it came from someone whose loyalty was unquestionable and whose perspective encompassed the entire sweep of Gaya. Unlike officials whose careers had been built within the unified system, Kim Yusin remembered the divided peninsula and understood viscerally what had been gained through the sacrifices of his generation. His voice carried unique moral authority in debates about how to preserve and strengthen what had been achieved. As his health began to decline in the early 670s, Kim Yusin faced the prospect of mortality with the same philosophical acceptance that had characterized his approach to all of life's challenges. He had achieved everything that ambition could desire and contributed more to his nation's welfare than any individual could reasonably hope to accomplish. The prospect of death held no terror for someone who had spent his entire adult life prepared to sacrifice everything for causes greater than personal survival. His final illness in 673 became a matter of national concern, with the entire kingdom watching anxiously for news of his condition. The man who had seemed indestructible, who had survived countless battles and campaigns that had claimed the lives of lesser warriors, was finally succumbing to the one enemy that no amount of courage or skill could defeat. The approaching end of his earthly journey marked the conclusion of an era in Korean history. On the first day of the 7th month in 673, Kim Yusin passed away at the age of 79. Surrounded by the family members and loyal retainers, who had shared his extraordinary journey. His final words, urging King Menmu to govern with wisdom and compassion, while maintaining the strength necessary to preserve Korean independence, epitomized the values that had guided his entire life.
The national mourning that followed his death demonstrated the extent to which he had become more than a military commander or government official. He had evolved into a symbol of Korean capability and determination. A living proof that their small peninsula nation could compete successfully with the great empires that dominated East Asia. His passing marked not just the end of a remarkable individual life, but the conclusion of the heroic age that had created unified Korea. King Manmu's decision to provide a royal funeral with unprecedented honors reflected both personal grief and recognition of historical significance. The gift of 1,000 bolts of silk and 2,000 sacks of grain for the funeral ceremonies demonstrated royal appreciation on a scale typically reserved for members of the royal family itself. The construction of a commemorative monument ensured that future generations would remember his contributions to Korean independence and unification. His burial site in Gumsun Plain, which became a pilgrimage destination for subsequent generations, reflected the popular understanding that Kim Yusin had transcended ordinary mortality to become something approaching a guardian deity for the Korean nation. The location was chosen not just for its scenic beauty, but for its symbolic significance as representing the eternal vigilance he would maintain over the kingdom he had helped create. But Kim Yusin's transformation into a guardian spirit extended far beyond the symbolic realm into actual popular belief and religious practice. The story recorded in the Samgakkyusa about his spirit appearing to complain about injustices suffered by his descendants revealed the extent to which ordinary Koreans viewed him as an active supernatural protector, rather than merely a historical memory. The tale describes how his ghost appeared to King Hwarang to protest the unjust execution, threatening to abandon his role as Korea's supernatural guardian, unless the injustice was corrected. The king's terrified response, including the donation of 30 gyeol of farmland to Chiseong Temple for prayers on Kim Yusin's behalf, demonstrated that even royal authority acknowledged his continued power and influence. This transformation of Kim Yusin from historical figure into supernatural guardian reflected the profound impact his life had made on Korean consciousness. He had become more than a military hero. He represented the eternal spirit of Korean independence, and the determination never again to submit to foreign domination. His continued presence as a protective deity provided psychological reassurance that the achievements of his generation would be preserved for posterity. The elevation of Kim Yusin to royal status as King Hyungmu by later rulers, despite his non-royal birth, represented unprecedented recognition of individual achievement transcending traditional social boundaries. This posthumous promotion acknowledged that his contributions to Korean civilization had been so fundamental that he deserved to be remembered as a co-founder of the unified state rather than merely as a servant of royal authority. His influence on subsequent Korean military tradition extended far beyond specific tactical innovations. The integration of scholarly learning with martial prowess that characterized his career became the ideal toward which future generations of Korean leaders would aspire. The first 3 volumes of the Samguk being dedicated entirely to Kim Yusin's biography. Out of 51 total biographical entries, demonstrated that even centuries after his death, Korean historians recognized him as the single most important individual in their nation's history. No other figure received comparable attention, reflecting scholarly consensus about his unique significance. Modern Korea continues to honor Kim Yusin's memory through monuments, schools, and cultural celebrations that maintain living connection with his legacy. His tomb in Gyeongju remains a site of national pilgrimage, where visitors can still feel the presence of the guardian spirit, who watches over Korean independence and prosperity. The boy born with the blood of fallen Gaya kings had fulfilled a destiny that surpassed even the most optimistic predictions of the omens that marked his birth. Through 7 decades of service, sacrifice, and achievement, he had transformed himself from refugee descendant into the architect of Korean unification and the eternal guardian of Korean independence. His spirit continues to inspire all who face seemingly impossible challenges. proving that individual courage and determination can reshape the destiny of nations. The guardian who once protected Korea with sword and strategy, now watches over the peninsula with the eternal vigilance that only true love of country can provide. Close your eyes and let these whispered memories carry you to peaceful sleep, knowing that some guardians never rest, some spirits never fade, and some heroes become eternal.